On this day in 1917, July 28th, nearly 10,000 Black Americans marched silently down Fifth Avenue in what is widely regarded as the first mass civil rights protest in New York City. And in our time, in response to the murder of George Floyd, all 50 states had marches happening within the same week for the first time in American history. I'm Doma T. Pungo, and over the next few weeks, we'll be drawing parallels between significant moments in history and what we see happening today. History can give us the context to better understand what we're living through today. I'm honored to have the opportunity to talk to one of our country's leading historians to better understand how our history can move us forward. I'm in conversation with Lonnie Bunch, the first African-American secretary of the Smithsonian Institution and the founding director of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African-American History and Culture. And let's talk about the history of marches. W.E.B. Du Bois put this march together July 28th, 1917. What happened?
Well, you've got to realize that part of the way Southerners began to control the newly freed enslaved people, formerly enslaved people, was through violence. And there's a long history of violence, intimidating black voters, intimidating blacks who were doing well economically. And the most horrible thing was lynching. And it became part of entertainment for communities. There are photographs of all communities standing around with kids pointing and smiling at broken black bodies. And so there was a desire to have the federal government pass a federal anti-lynching law to say that there would be a federal crime and that the federal government was willing to protect black lives. And so what Du Bois said is, we need to show that there is a way to focus all of our attention on that. And so Du Bois did two things. First, he had a banner that hung out the front of the office of the NAACP, says a man was lynched. And then he organized this silent march. What was so powerful about it was that it was silent. And it was silent in respect to the broken bodies, but also silent to show people watching that blacks could be organized, right? That there was a fear that there would be a riot. And so that march, I thought, was one of the most powerful moments. The sad thing is that the federal anti-lynching law was never passed. But what Du Bois did was he set a pattern, and he let people know that it's important to hold the federal government accountable. And that in essence, his belief was that if you could convince the federal government to make change, that will trickle down into other parts of the nation. It really then laid a foundation for so many other marches throughout the 20th century.
We must say that we cannot be patient. We do not want our freedom gradually, but we want to be free now.
I was riding my bike through Brooklyn, which has become my thing I do for fun throughout quarantine to get some fresh air. And I hadn't known about this march that was happening for Black trans lives. And there were all these people dressed in white, marching near the Barclays, completely silent. And it was bone chilling. And it showed strength, it conveyed power. It was something visceral about seeing that. But also a march to bring awareness to something that's happening among citizens isn't part of the function of marches. Marches, in my estimation, appeal more to governments and structures of power than they do to the people who are part of the same condition and situation. You know, gangsters aren't looking at folks marching down the street and throwing their guns in the garbage. Right. So could you just educate us on what the function of a march really is?
Well, here's where I want to add a little bit more than what you said. I think you're absolutely right that the function of a march is really to pull attention to an issue that would force the people with power to make change. A march is really speaking truth to power. But also sometimes a march in, let's say, a local African-American community is allowing people who suffer a loss and who feel voiceless in their own community to say, I'm going to take back my own community.
No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace! No justice! No peace!
So I see it on sort of several levels. But I think the most important level for me is that a march is both a way to give those who have been silenced a voice. It is a way that you're able to bring that voice to the political community, and you're able to have that voice now seen in many of the mainstream media to help affect change. And maybe more than anything else, it gives those who want change the sustenance of being part of a community that is saying, we will together demand change, and we will support each other as we struggle to fight the good fight.
Thank you for that context, Secretary. I never thought about it that way, about how it does give the grieving mother, an opportunity to stand on that same corner and say, no, this is mine now. I'm reclaiming this.
We ain't going till we get it. We ain't going till we get it. We ain't going till we get it. We want change. We want change. We want change. We want change. Yeah, we want change.
As I was talking about riding through Brooklyn and seeing these protests, if I go on a bike ride 3 times a week, each day I'm going to bump into a protest. And you'll see kids marching with their moms and dads. You see white kids. In fact, I think I see more white folks marching in some of these protests than I see black folks. Could you talk about the value of this moment in this intersectionality, not only among allies, but also this intergenerational thing that's happening where families, moms and dads are having conversations with their kids really young about racism?
I think that there is nothing more powerful than seeing intergenerational folks wrestling with fundamental problems, with parents helping kids understand what difference means, what fairness means, and why you have to take a stance to demand a country be more fair. And so that is, I think, to me, is very, very powerful. What is also powerful is just the diversity of people that are involved. Often during the civil rights movement, many people who weren't African American were participated for the right reason, but they were participating because they thought, let me help the black community. What you want is people to realize that I'm helping myself, regardless of who I am, by being involved in this march because it makes America better. And I think that's a distinction that I think is really important. So I'm like you, in awe of seeing all these diverse people and seeing parents bringing their kids. I think it's very powerful.
And it's so interesting, too, seeing black activists take this knowledge of how to combat racial injustice and use it to spread out to other injustices, largening the umbrella. What is there to say about how black Americans are using this knowledge about how to mobilize, how to march, and allowing and teaching other sectors, other elements of the country how to mobilize for their issues? It's almost a great irony along that vein that even conservatives and supremacists are marching to protest for things like protecting their Second Amendment rights, or for things like why they don't want to wear masks. They're literally using the same method that we've used, and it's an interesting thing to observe.
Well, I think it's fascinating. If you look historically, forgive me as a historian, what you'll see is that the African American community has developed the strategies, the tactics that have worked. So suddenly you see in the 1960s, instead of sort of just African Americans, you see the women's movement coming out of that, using some of the tactics, the media, the demonstrations. You see the gay movement coming out of that, right? You see a Gray Panthers dealing with seniors. So I think it's really important to recognize that what the African American community was first and foremost about was, yes, let us find freedom and fairness for our community, but by doing that, we expect to find freedom and fairness for all Americans.
We must get in this revolution and complete the revolution. In Chicago, Detroit, Philadelphia, and all over this nation, the black masses on the march for joy and freedom.
That, to me, is one of the most generous gifts that the African American community has given to America. Not only have they envisioned an America that was yet to be, but they envisioned helping others find the way to help America be made better.
You always drop the mic. It's always perfect. That's great. That's great right there.